Have you ever wondered how to work with UV resin? Well, you're in for a treat because today we're going to explore just that. UV resin is a fantastic material for all sorts of DIY projects, from jewelry making to resin art and so much more. But before we dive in, it's crucial to talk about safety. Working with UV resin requires some precautions. It's essential to wear protective gear like gloves and safety glasses to shield your skin and eyes from the resin. Resin can be sticky, and you don't want it in your eyes or on your skin. Furthermore, remember to work in a well-ventilated area. Ventilation helps to dissipate any fumes that may arise during the process, ensuring you're not breathing in anything harmful. Safety first, as they say. Now we're ready to dive into the world of UV resin. But before we start, what exactly is UV resin? Now that's a good question. UV resin, or ultraviolet resin, is a unique type of material that is primarily made from a blend of acrylic monomers. The magic begins when this resin is exposed to ultraviolet light. That's right, the UV and UV resin isn't just for show. This exposure causes a chemical reaction that transforms the liquid resin into a solid form, a process known as curing. And the best part? It happens in just a few minutes. You might be wondering, well, what can I do with it? The possibilities are endless. UV resin is widely used in crafting, jewelry making, and even in industrial applications. Its quick curing time makes it a favorite among DIY enthusiasts, so it's versatile, quick to cure, and great for DIY projects. Let's get to the fun part now. Let's gather our materials. To start, we'll need UV resin. This is the key ingredient in our project and will harden under UV light. Next up is a UV lamp. This nifty device will be used to cure or harden the resin. Make sure to choose one that's strong enough to set the resin properly. Silicone molds are next on our list. These come in all shapes and sizes, allowing you to create a variety of pieces. Choose one that suits your project. You'll also need pigments, which will give color to your resin. You can let your creativity run free here, as the options are limitless. Don't forget about a mixing tool and cup for combining your resin and pigment. Lastly, it's always a good idea to have a pair of gloves handy. Working with resin can get a bit messy, and gloves will keep your hands clean and safe. There we have it, all the necessary materials. Now on to the creation process. Before we begin, let's set up our workspace. The foundation of any successful DIY project is a clean, organized work area. It not only aids in the smooth flow of the project, but also ensures safety. Make sure your workspace is clutter-free with all your tools and materials within easy reach. Lighting is another crucial aspect of preparing your workspace. UV resin reacts to ultraviolet light, hence, it's essential to have a good source of UV light. This can be either a UV lamp or direct sunlight. But remember, not too hot. You don't want to cure your resin prematurely. If you're using a UV lamp, position it so that the light evenly covers your work area. If you're relying on sunlight, make sure your workspace is near a window that gets plenty of sun. And there you have it. A clean, well-lit workspace is key to a successful UV resin project. With our workspace ready, we can now begin our project. Now comes the exciting part, mixing and pouring the UV resin. Let's start with the mixing process. If you want to add a splash of color to your creation, now's the time to add some pigments. But remember, a little goes a long way. You only need a few drops of pigment to transform the clear resin into a vibrant hue. Mix it well until you get a uniform color. You don't want any streaks or blobs of pigment in your final piece. Now moving on to pouring. The key to a successful pour is to go slow and steady. Rushing the process can introduce bubbles into the resin, which can detract from the clarity and finish of your piece. So, take your time and pour the resin into the mold, starting from the edges and working your way towards the center. This will help push any air out and reduce the chances of bubble formation. However, if you do notice any bubbles, don't worry. You can easily remove them using a heat tool. Just wave it over the surface of the resin and the bubbles will rise to the surface and pop. But be careful not to overdo it, as too much heat can cause the resin to cure prematurely. Once you've poured the resin, it's time to let it settle. This will allow any remaining bubbles to rise to the surface where you can remove them. It's also a good time to add any embedments or decorations to your piece. Just remember to be gentle when placing them into the resin to avoid creating more bubbles. And there you have it. You've successfully mixed and poured your first layer of UV resin. But remember, this is just the first step in the creation process. There's still more to come. That's the first layer done, but we're not finished yet. Now we wait for the magic to happen. It's time to discuss an essential part of the process, curing the resin. This step is where we let the UV light do its job and solidify our resin. What does curing mean? Well, it's the process of hardening the resin using ultraviolet light. You see, UV resin contains photoinitiators, which are substances that produce a chemical reaction when exposed to light. So when we expose our resin to UV light, these photoinitiators kick into action and cause the resin to harden. It's a fascinating process that's as much science as it is art, but how does it work, you ask? It's pretty straightforward. We simply place our resin under a UV lamp or out in direct sunlight. The UV light from these sources triggers the curing process. However, remember that the time required for curing can vary, depending on the thickness of the resin and the power of your UV light source. Now, you might wonder how long this process takes. On average, a thin layer of UV resin might take around 2 to 4 minutes to cure under a UV lamp. But if you're using direct sunlight, it could take a bit longer, maybe around 10 to 20 minutes. If you've poured a thicker layer, you might need to give it a bit more time. Bear in mind that curing isn't a process to rush. It's crucial to give your resin enough time to fully harden. If you don't, you might end up with a sticky or soft project, and we certainly don't want that. Also, remember to turn your piece occasionally to ensure that the light hits all parts and corners. This way we ensure a consistent cure throughout the piece. So, let's give our resin some time under the UV light. Remember, patience is key here. We want our resin to come out perfectly cured, solid, and crystal clear. And there we have it, a beautifully cured piece of UV resin, but let's add some more layers. Ready for more? Let's add some layers. The beauty of working with UV resin is that you can build up layers to create a multi-dimensional piece. It's like crafting your very own miniature world within a pendant or a paperweight. Now, to add a new layer, you're essentially repeating the process we've been through. You'll pour a thin layer of resin, then cure it under the UV light. Remember, the trick is to keep the layers thin. This ensures that the resin cures evenly and completely, thereby reducing the risk of bubbles. And it also allows you to create a more intricate design. You can play with different colors, add glitter, or even embed small objects for an interesting effect. Now, if you're planning to add embellishments, this is your moment to shine. You can add anything from tiny dried flowers to sparkling gemstones. Just make sure they're properly placed and then seal them with another layer of resin. And here's a pro tip for you. If you're embedding something like a photo or a sticker, apply a thin layer of resin on top of it first and let it cure. This will create a protective barrier and prevent the colors from bleeding into the resin. Once you've added all your layers and are happy with your design, it's time for the final cure. This is the moment of truth. Place your piece under the UV light one last time and let it cure fully. This can take anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes depending on the power of your light and the thickness of your piece. And there you have it. With each layer you add, your resin piece becomes more and more unique. It's a process that requires patience and creativity, but the end result is truly rewarding. So take your time, enjoy the process, and let your creativity flow. Voila! Our final product crafted with patience and creativity. And there you have it. We've traveled through the fascinating world of UV resin together, from understanding what it is to ensuring our workspace is ready and safe. We've gathered our materials, mixed, and poured our UV resin. We've been patient during the curing process, adding layers for depth and interest, and then allowed for that final all-important cure. Safety has been our constant companion throughout this process, reminding us to use gloves, work in a well-ventilated area, and never to look directly at the UV light. It's so important to respect these precautions, not only for our health but also for the success of our creations. Now it's your turn to dive into the world of UV resin. Experiment with colors, shapes, and textures. Add layers. Embed objects. Let your creativity run wild. Remember, the only limit is your imagination. Thank you for joining us on this UV resin journey.